lucrative? So the answer was pretty clear. GM started a new company with three of its partners, Firestone, Phillips, and Standard Oil, and they called it National City Lines. And the sole purpose of National City Lines was to buy out these trolley systems that were now for sale, to buy them up and dismantle them. And that's what they did. They bought up trolley systems in 45 cities. They ripped up the tracks to make sure nobody would ever put them back, and they replaced them with buses, less efficient buses that use their products. Baltimore, Chicago, Detroit, Oakland, Philadelphia, Phoenix, St. Louis, and Los Angeles all lost their trolley systems to inefficient buses. From 1936 to 1950, National City Lines systematically decimated public transit in this country, and they stacked up the cars and left them to rot. The weird part is that GM would then do this again some 70 years later with their EV1. The parallels are kind of creepy. Their plan worked. In the 1920s, 1 in 10 Americans had a car. By the 1950s, 8 in 10 Americans had a car. You needed a car to get around. You had no other alternative. After all, how would you get where you need to go? Just as horses needed hay, cars needed fuel. So suddenly service stations started appearing. The first one started appearing about 1905. By 1914, Standard Oil opened 34 stations along here on the West Coast. At first, they started to conform to Main Street architecture, but then quickly that created traffic issues along main streets, so they quickly invented the new archetype of the service station that you know and love, the drive-thru. And suddenly more of that sense of humanity, more of that sense of scale was lost. This is Charles Wilson. He was president of GM until 1953, when he left GM to become Secretary of Defense under President Eisenhower in 1954. His big act as Secretary of Defense was the Interstate Highway Act of 1956. The Interstate Highway Act was the largest single public works project of its kind in American history. Even to this day, 41,000 miles of freeway over a 20-year period. It's what gave you this. You all love this, right? This is your favorite place. And the dollar amounts were enormous, $25 billion. In 1956 dollars, mind you, to lay that 41,000 miles of freeway. How did they sell this to the American people? Well, it was the Secretary of Defense, remember? So he told everybody it was for national defense. To prevent, when the Russians were inevitably going to attack, we needed to flee our cities, so we needed the freeways. People had all these new cars, they wanted to use them anyway, they wanted to get out. But the very act of building a freeway is disruptive. The very act of building a freeway destroys community, destroys urban fabric. Sometimes in absurd ways it destroys community. After all, what kind of signal does this send to children who live on that street? And the weird irony is that freeways increase congestion. No amount of widening the freeways is going to reduce traffic because the cities can't absorb it anyway. You can widen the highways all you want, it's just going to make traffic downtown even worse. So we're going the wrong way. Cities responded as best they could. They made the blocks longer, the streets wider, the sidewalks narrower. In Europe, they didn't have this issue. The streets were set in stone, quite literally. The car had to adapt to it. I mean, after all, think about a city like London or a city like Paris. And now compare that with, let's say, New York. All at the same scale, mind you. It almost seems like our American cities were made for the car in a way, doesn't it? We even invented a new type of community called suburbia, where you don't even need to get out of the car. You can just drive around in cul-de-sacs, keep going around and around, You don't even need to stop. And the weird part is that most of the time we sit in the car. The average Californian spends 84 hours a year just sitting there, stuck in traffic. And when we do finally arrive somewhere, which is the raison d'etre for cars to arrive, like when we arrive at home, 94% of the time it just sits idle. We only use the car about an hour and a half a day. Most of the time it just kind of sits there. And when we do use it, we underuse it, which is why the carpool lanes are all empty. And since you're sitting there stuck in traffic anyway, we designed the entire landscape to look like this. One big, beautiful advertisement for you. We even invented a new marketing campaign called the billboard. So you'd have something to read while you sit there. But the billboards never say anything interesting, do they? They're kind of gross, I think. More than half of every typical modern American city is now parking lot, paved over. We've decided everything should be for the car first and people, especially children, last. Here in LA, it's even worse. 70% of LA County is parking because we decided the car needs to go everywhere. This, by the way, this is... San Francisco got its first underground parking garage in Union Square, which is still there, by the way, in 1951. And everybody in LA was jealous, I guess, so they started a campaign. If San Francisco can do it, so can we. And I guess you got your wish. Newer cities didn't even have to conform. Newer cities just kept sprawling. Cities like Houston that now cover 600 square miles That little bit in the center, that's the downtown where the tall buildings are. We don't have neighborhoods anymore. We don't have communities anymore. We just have mega regions. Pretty soon, the entire East Coast is just going to connect from Maine all the way to Florida. It'll just be one big strip center. At the turn of the century, we had invented skyscrapers, our testament to American ingenuity, American technology. Well, those skyscrapers have been replaced with land scrapers. We just keep eating more land. 10 acres of farmland every hour. And as such, we just become, you know, fatter, dumber, slower. It just keeps widening out. Now, if Sesame Street was a real place, my 3-year-old thinks it is, but if it was a real place, it would be kind of the hip place that you'd visit on the weekends, but you couldn't afford to live in, right? You'd go and visit and just shop there, and then you'd leave. If Sesame Street was a real place, you'd have Sesame Street, which would be cool, but around it would just be just junk all around it, just suburban sprawl all around it. We even give the best floors of the building to the car. The first few floors of the building go to the car, closer to the street, closer to humanity, pushing people further away. And inside the building, we don't design the structural system based on what's efficient or what's economical, and certainly not what's environmental. We base it on how we can fit 3 cars in between the columns. Every structural system is based on a 30-foot grid just so we can fit 3 cars in between. But the car destroys community. This is the work of Donald Appleyard, a sociologist in the 1970s. He took 3 identical streets in San Francisco, the first one with light vehicle traffic, and he measured the social interactions, and he found there was a lot of it. It feels like home here. People are warm, the people are friendly, everybody knows each other. And then he went over a few other streets, the moderate vehicle traffic, and the community dropped precipitously. Yeah, you see the neighbors, but they aren't close friends. People say hi, but they don't stop and talk. And then he went over to the heavy traffic street, and there was almost none, almost zero interaction. The car destroys community. 3 identical streets, all the same scale. All this while, we've been told that public transit is too expensive. Public transit isn't expensive. Public transit is cheap. Public transit is transparent. They pay for their stations, they pay for their rails, they pay for their cars. You know what everything costs. The automobile externalizes it all to you, the American taxpayer. $25 billion in 1956. $111 billion year after year after year to maintain those freeways. But unless you live in San Francisco, Portland, New York, you can't survive without a car. You couldn't live here in LA without a car. I mean, you'd starve to death, wouldn't you? So I say this. Yeah, well, good for you. You should, but still. As such, we Americans are the lowest percentage of users to use public transit. We're the highest percentage of users to never even set foot on public transit. So few Americans use public transit that 1/3 of all public transit riders are just in New York City. That's how little the rest of the country uses it. And public transit does exactly what you want it to. It brings people downtown to the heart of the city where they can shop and spend money and work and commute, right? And all the while, we've been told that buses are icky. Because, you know, there's people on them, and people are gross, and then people sneeze, and they touch you, and they rub against you, and they smell, and they pee themselves, and like whatever, I don't know what they do. So as such, we've underfunded and half-hearted it for decades, so it's really kind of gone nowhere. Yet somehow we're told that this is progress. This isn't progress. This does the exact opposite. It takes people away from the city, away from downtown. And to what? The geniuses out in the suburbs? What are we rushing to go see? So we are stuck, quite literally. As all the news about this oil spill kept coming out, I kept getting more and more upset, and at first I wasn't sure why. So I started to categorize it, and I put it in these 7 categories that I called the 7 deadly sins. And you can see them there all on the top. Greed, lust, gluttony, sloth, envy, pride, and wrath. Now the first one, greed, well, that belongs to the BP oil executives. Because I know what you're thinking when I say greed. But these guys, they've taken it to a whole new level. Like, they kind of reinvented the art. You have to realize something. All these accidents, all these safety warnings, all these violations, they're all part of doing business for BP. You have to realize that BP is the largest producer of oil on U.S. soil. There's a lot at stake. There's a lot of money at stake. 4 weeks before the Deepwater Horizon explosion, chunks of rubber gasket from the blowout preventer coughed to the surface. The workers on board said, "We need to stop." And BP said, no, you got to keep going. 2 days before the explosion, both control pods failed. And the workers said, "We need to stop." And BP said, no, you need to keep going. There was this pressure, pun intended, building to finish the well as quickly as possible. As I said, it was the world record holder, 35,000 feet down, $350 million. It was supposed to be done in 21 days, and it was taking 6 weeks and still not done. So they cut every corner they could. Instead of using 21 centralizers, they used 6. Instead of setting it with cement, they set it with mud. Any corner they could that could shave hours or possibly days off it and speed things up. Now in 1989, we had another oil failure. The Exxon Valdez tanker spilled 11 million gallons of oil into Prince William Sound up in Alaska. And at the time, Exxon was facing fines of some $7 billion, and they didn't have the money. So they went to their bank, JP Morgan, and they said, you need to give us a loan. And they said, no, we don't want to do that. You don't have the money. And they said, well, you're a bank. You have to figure it out. So JP Morgan realized something. They invented a new financial technique where they sell this debt to foreign investors, where they don't even hold it. And they call this the credit default swap. Now, you might remember the credit default swap because this is the same financial instrument that almost bankrupted the country 2 years ago, all in the name of oil. By the way, in 1989, when Exxon Valdez spilled those 11 million gallons of oil, who did they get to lead the cleanup? BP, of course. And when you go there today and you turn over a rock, there's oil underneath. They not only recovered 8,000 gallons of the original oil, most of it was just left there. Now, the sin of lust, that belongs to us, the American people. Because I don't know if you realized it, but you were seduced. You had to have been seduced. How else can you explain it? It must be seduction, because how else can you explain that we made the entire landscape look like this? Cars come first, and people, especially children, come last. Look at what the car companies did to you. You were told that you could be navigators, you could be adventurers, you could even be explorers. All you need to do is hop in your car and you can go to New York or Montana or Aspen. Ooh. You can even go to Capri. I don't even know where that is, Capri, and that sounds exciting. All you have to do is hop in your car and you can escape. You can go on safari or even maybe an expedition. If you have a Magnum or an XL, you might eventually get a Hummer. Wouldn't that make you feel special? Unless, of course, you know you're Mini, you're smart. Even our music seduced us into loving our cars. Baby, you could drive my car behind the wheel of my little Deuce Coupe, down the freeway of love in my little red Corvette, get out of my dreams, get into my car with no particular place to go. We could even get our kicks in some place called Route 66. We even call it sex drive. That's how much you love your cars, don't you, you weirdos? You'd probably sleep in your car tonight if you could, wouldn't you, sickos? How much do you love your car now, by the way? No, it's $100 to fill it up. Still, love affair still going on there? By the way, just to give you a sense of perspective, the first Model T got 25 miles to the gallon. Do you know the national average today? 21. So maybe we haven't learned a thing. Now, the sin of gluttony, that belongs to the lobbyists, because they've been controlling energy policy for 40 years now, actually. Now, if you're a full-time lobbyist, you have to register with the government, and there's 11,000 of those. But if you just do it part-time, thank you for one person laughing, thank you. You've never seen this movie? All right. But if you just do it part-time, you don't need to register, and there's 90,000 more of them. To give you a sense of scale, there's 4 climate lobbyists for every member of Congress. And that's just climate lobbyists, not counting healthcare lobbyists or small business lobbyists, just climate lobbyists. 4 people telling every member of Congress they don't need to worry about carbon, it's fine the way it is. Lobbying is embedded, it's institutionalized. They call it the 4th branch of government, after all. Jack Abramoff, the disgraced lobbyist, he said it's a form of legalized bribery. And the worst part is that most of these lobbyists are former federal employees. They know their way around, they know the system, they know who to call. These are their old lunch partners, their old golfing buddies. And the dollar amounts are obscene, $3.5 billion last year alone. To give you a sense of scale, $3.5 billion is $1.3 million for every hour that Congress was in session. So who is Congress beholden to? You, the American taxpayer, who pay them $200 grand a year? Or the lobbyists chasing after them at $1.3 million an hour? The oil and gas lobby is one of the largest of its kind, $238 million since 1990. And they give to both parties, mind you. They don't really discriminate. They hedge their bets. No matter who's in office, they want to make sure that they're having some say in how it's managed. Now, lobbyists play an important role in democracy. They give vital technical information to our lawmakers. After all, in the 1930s, when the Golden Gate Bridge was being built, the ferry lobby came forth and said, you can't build the Golden Gate Bridge. It would be terrible, because they knew it would put the ferry building out of business, which I guess they did. Bob Herbert of the New York Times said that this is the bitter reality of the American present, a period in which big business has cemented an unholy alliance with big government against the interest of ordinary Americans, who are, of course, the great majority of Americans. The majority of Americans, he wrote, no longer matter. Now, the sin of sloth, that goes to the media, because they've been pretty lazy lately, haven't they? And you have to remember something. It's not like they've always been right. I mean, they have a history of getting things wrong. The media has a history of doing this. But lately, the current media, they've taken this to a whole new level. I mean, they've really gone beyond it. Here, I'll show you how it works. Let's say you want to do a story about global warming. So in one window, you got a noted scientist, and you want to hear his opinions about the data. And in the next window, some guy with an opinion. And then they have a shouting match for 10 minutes, and whoever yells the loudest wins the debate. This isn't discourse. This isn't how we discuss things in a rational society, but this is taken for discourse nowadays. Former journalist Britt Hume, 24 days into the oil spill, he said, "Where's the oil? You don't see it washed up on the beach." But the newspaper in Mobile, Alabama told a different story. And then the next day was the worst day yet. Sarah Palin, who has no title, by the way, just a Twitterer, I guess would be her title. She went down to the Gulf Coast to, empathize with people and show people that she can relate to them. And she said, "I know what you're going through. I lived and worked through that there Exxon Valdez oil spill, you betcha." Exxon Valdez oil spill was in 1989. Sarah Palin was 25 years old in 1989. She was a sportscaster in another part of the state that didn't see any oil. For her to say that she lived and worked through the Exxon Valdez would be like saying that I lived and worked through the Oklahoma City bombing, even because I drove through there once. It doesn't really make sense. And then we have Rush Limbaugh, who said environmentalist wackos may have blown up the oil rig, to head off more drilling. Yeah, that makes sense. The environmentalists did it, because why wouldn't they want the worst disaster in U.S. history? Now look at his language. May have blown up the oil rig. He's not accusing anybody. He's just, hey, they may have. Which made me realize what we need. This is Tom Scott. He's a graphic designer. He came up with a great idea. Warning labels for our journalism. Warning. The journalist doesn't know what the hell they're talking about. Warning. This is basically just a press release they've copied and pasted. Maybe this is what we need. Now the sin of envy, that belongs to the regulators. Because they were kind of envious of the very people they were in charge of. If anything, Deepwater Horizon is a testament to what happens when corporate malfeasance meets just plain out regulatory failure. The MMS was at best complicit and at worst neglectful in how they handled it. Not to mention the fact that they were in charge of collecting royalties from the very people they were supposed to be regulating, which is a huge conflict of interest. Not to mention the fact that over the past year we've heard about all these other crazy things: skeet shooting contests, hunting, fishing trips, golf tournaments, crawfish boils, whatever those are, and Christmas parties and whatever else going on. Now the sin of pride, that belongs to the politicians. Because what proud little peacocks they've been lately, haven't they? Less than a month after the oil spill, Governor Bobby Jindal from Louisiana, see, this is why we need more drilling, which still doesn't make any sense to me. David Vitter from Louisiana, he said, "Oh, the oil spill, that's fine, but not drilling, that could be potentially devastating to Louisiana." Really? If you look at his campaign contributions, which are all a matter of public record, by the way, $450,000 from oil companies since 2005. Then there's Joe Barton from Texas. He's the one, you remember, that apologized to BP when they had to testify. You remember? "I'm sorry you had to be here. I'm sorry you had to come here and do what amounts to a shakedown," he called it. He used to work for BP. These are his old bosses. No wonder he's apologizing. If you look up his campaign contributions, almost $1.5 million from oil companies since 1989. But my absolute favorite, Haley Barbour from Mississippi. Haley Barbour's the one that said, "Oh, the spills, they'll have minimal impact. That's fine." Haley Barbour used to be a lobbyist. 2 years ago, he was a lobbyist. We've now cut out the middleman. He's the quintessential 21st century politician. Lobbyists that now take office. His lobbying firm still does business. Now, you might remember Haley Barbour from his TV work in the 70s. I don't know if you remember. This level of corruption is insane. If you look at his campaign contributions, $1.8 million from oil companies since 2003. Another $1 million for his lobbying firm, which is still doing business. I often wonder how the Founding Fathers would react knowing that the system is being gamed in this way. I mean, after all, what would they do knowing that politicians are acting like this? Politicians have set up a system where everything they say sounds great, but really is painless. All solutions must be painless. They say these things that make great sound bites, but they don't actually have to do anything. And that's kind of the problem. Thomas Friedman of the New York Times said that too many of our poll-driven, toxically partisan, cable TV-addicted, money-corrupted political class, his words, are more interested in what keeps them in power than what would again make America powerful, more interested in defeating each other than saving the country. Which leads me to my last sin, that of wrath, which really belongs to us. Because you should be pissed right now, shouldn't you? I mean, you should really be much angrier than you're looking. You look kind of happy. Perhaps the best headline I've seen in this past year is the one from The Onion. which said that a massive flow of bullshit continues to flow from the Gulf and it can't be stopped. Maybe this is what we need. People were angry, they were frustrated, they were upset, and their frustration manifested itself sometimes in beautiful ways. And when they didn't have artistic talent to paint the sides of the stations, they just took to attacking them with brown paint. And why shouldn't they? After all, it says right there in the station that they're responsible for their spills. No wonder they're angry. A lot of the anger was directed towards this man, Tony Hayward, former CEO of BP. He's the PR genius who said, oh, everybody wants this over. Believe me, I'd like my life back. Well, he got it back because they fired him a few weeks later. But our anger shouldn't just be at him, it should be at the whole system, the entire energy policy. Maybe what we should have done to plug up the leak is filled it with the criminal charges we should have brought against all these companies in the first place. Wow, thank you. Very political audience. This is the part in Kansas where they boo me. You know, we used to learn from our mistakes. In 1970, the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland caught fire, because I guess rivers do that every now and again. And from it, we tried to learn from our mistakes, and we invented the Clean Water Act, changed regulations, and learned from our mistakes. In 1978, Love Canal in Niagara Falls, New York, sickened thousands. And we invented Superfund and learned from our mistakes. In Bhopal, India, a gas leak sickened thousands, killed hundreds of thousands. And from it, we changed regulations and learned from our mistakes. And then a nuclear incident in Chernobyl nuclear plant in 1986 left 25% of the former Soviet Union still uninhabitable to this day. And from it, we changed regulations and learned from our mistakes. What will we learn from Deepwater Horizon? What should we learn from Deepwater Horizon? What'd you say? Don't eat fish, yeah. I'll have the shrimp cocktail, please. The crude reality, pun, I hope you're appreciating these puns, by the way.
Yeah, we kind of laughed.
The crude reality is that we're covered in oil, we're drenched in it, we're slipping and sliding on the floor to get up from it. After all, look at how we use our oil. We are truly addicted. A quarter of it is used to make plastic stuff, like those chairs you're sitting on, right? Most of it is used for oil, transportation, combustion, cars, buses, trucks, everything. You'll notice that hardly any of it is used for electricity. We don't use oil for electricity. We use coal, we use maybe solar, wind, mostly coal. But you'll notice that oil doesn't come into the equation. We could put solar panels on every rooftop in California and it wouldn't matter, we'd still be addicted to oil. We'd be off coal, which would be great, but we'd still be addicted to oil. Oil has left its imprint on every aspect of our lives. Everything that we do is tied into oil. So suddenly the cost of oil affects everything else. Now if you look at the production dating all the way back to the Industrial Revolution, you'll see that oil production had gone up and then peaked in 1970 here in the US, and we reached what we call peak oil, meaning that no amount of effort required would pull any more oil out of US soil. So now the hiccups. So suddenly there was this demand for more US oil, so you see offshore drilling started right around that time. But you'll notice that our consumption just keeps going up. That little dip, by the way, that's Jimmy Carter's doing, you can thank him for it. And if we just look at the area from 1970 to today, you'll see that consumption goes up while production goes down, and that difference has to be made up somewhere. And that difference is made up in oil imports. Right now, we import 71% of our oil, and mostly from countries that don't like us very much. And eventually, it'll be 100%, guaranteed. What's going to change? What's going to happen? We're running out of oil here. We have to get it from somewhere. And if you overlay the presidential administrations on top of it, you'll see what I mean. It doesn't seem to really have much of any effect. So there's been this pressure mounting to find more U.S. sources of oil, so offshore drilling seemed like a likely candidate. After all, offshore drilling is 35% of our production. But remember, most of it is imported anyway, so offshore drilling is really only 1% of our total consumption. We could do away with offshore drilling tomorrow and you wouldn't even miss it. It doesn't change anything at the pump. We could just make cars more fuel efficient and do away with it completely and you wouldn't even miss it. But instead, we have to do something. So we keep drilling more and more, mostly in the Gulf. 5,100 oil rigs in the Gulf and counting. When they asked the BP executives why you weren't better prepared for it, they said, oh, an oil spill, that was inconceivable to us. Didn't even consider it. But if you look at it from space, and you look at the oil rigs, how could it have possibly been inconceivable? It never occurred to you that one of these 5,100 might leak? And then we have Deepwater Horizon, the world record holder, 41 miles off the coast. Now, June 15th of last year, President Obama made his first official Oval Office speech to the nation. And many of us environmentalists were very excited because we thought he'd lay out a new energy policy for us for the next century. And here's what he said.
The tragedy unfolding on our coast is the most painful and powerful reminder yet that the time to embrace a clean energy future is now. Now Now is the moment for this generation to embark on a national mission to unleash America's innovation and seize control of our own destiny.
But this speech seemed familiar to me, and I couldn't quite figure out why.
Breakthroughs on this and other new technologies will help us reach another great goal: to replace more than 75% of our oil imports from the Middle East by 2025.
We need a long-term energy strategy to maximize conservation and maximize the development of alternative sources of energy, and also maximize domestic sources of energy.
For I know from personal experience, there is no security for the United States in further dependence on foreign oil.
And let me pledge that with the help of the people of your great state, this administration is determined that America will never again be captive to a foreign oil cartel.
The energy crisis is real. It is worldwide. It is a clear and present danger to our nation.
Sorry about that.
These are facts, and we simply must face them.
Last January 15th, I went before your senators and representatives in Congress with a comprehensive plan to make our country independent of foreign sources of energy by 1985.
America's energy demands have grown so rapidly that they now outstrip our energy supplies. As a result, we face the possibility of temporary fuel shortages and some increases in fuel prices in America.
40 years of presidents telling us that we need to do something about our energy policy, and 40 years of nothing really changing. Starting in 1974, going all the way up to 1979, we had gas rationing in this country, and some of you are old enough to remember this. This became a familiar sight at gas stations all over the U.S. They simply ran out. I remember sitting in line with my parents and saying, "Isn't it kind of dumb to sit in an idling car waiting for gas?" And they said, "Shut up," you know, whatever they said. They hit me. But eventually other people realized that, and they started lining up with buckets. If you look at the history of gas, dating all the way back to the Industrial Revolution, we've always, and you adjust it for inflation, we've always paid between $2 to $3 a gallon. It's always kind of been within that little pain point. And when it gets too high, we cut back like we're doing now, and then the gas company panics like they did on Friday, and they suddenly drop the price of oil, and then we get back on our addiction. It's just been this treadmill. And we just keep getting stuck in this level of addiction over and over and over again. We've been doing it for decades. So we are stuck, thank you for two people that realize that this movie is, and so we are stuck in this virtual hell. Now, if they ask Americans, this is very subtle, it's very subtle. I don't know what she's on, but it's, if they ask Americans, do you favor offshore drilling, the majority now after the Deepwater Horizon spill, they say no, not at all. But if you ask the people of the Gulf Coast, look at what his shirt says. Keep drilling. This is their livelihood. This is their way of life. This is what they've known for generations. And they're scared. They're petrified, frankly, because they don't know what awaits them. So they want to just keep drilling. They just want to eke out one more generation. They just want to make it last a little bit more. So we're still stuck on this treadmill with no possible solutions in sight. So I want to offer you some solutions. Since every solution must be painless, I'm going to give you some relatively painless solutions, some of which are serious, some of which are not, but you get the point. The first one I have is called the Windy Plan. Simply put, let's convert those 5,100 oil rigs into wind farms. Let's create electricity. After all, you never see this headline, do you? There was a giant wind spill the other day. I heard it got so bad one guy had to wear a sweater. We didn't have bailouts for telegraph operators. We didn't have bailouts for lamplighters. We didn't have bailouts for carbon paper manufacturers. They had an obsolete technology that we didn't need anymore, so we let them die out. Why are we bailing out the oil companies? I got another solution called the free parking plan. Simply put, we get everybody to park and get out of their cars, and walk around. We could have incentives for hybrid and electric vehicle owners. And since you only use your car for an hour and a half a day, we'll have city car share programs everywhere. So that way you don't need a car, you can just share one. And we can convert all those leftover parking lots into parks, places for children again. We can use right price parking. We're doing this in San Francisco, by the way, where instead of driving around the block for 8 to 12 minutes, spewing exhaust into your lungs, then they've cut that down to 30 seconds to 2 minutes, so that way you park quicker. The prices change throughout the day. In Pasadena, they're doing this. They're taking parking meter revenue and giving it back to the residents, giving it back to the shopkeepers, and it's caused a revitalization of downtown Pasadena. I don't know if you've been up there lately, but it's pretty cool. You have to remember something, that every time you buy local food, not only is it better for you and better for the local economy, that's yet another delivery truck that's not going through your neighborhood spewing exhaust into your kids' lungs. I got another plan called the Rubin Plan, named, well, in part for this book. This is Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, but let's face it, it could be anywhere, right? In the U.S., this is what most of it looks like. And whenever I see something like this, I always ask, well, where do children walk? So let's make a place for kids to actually walk. And then let's put the buildings back to the street wall so we get a sense of community, more of a sense of human scale. And then we'll add a buffer of trees to kind of separate cars from people. And then we'll add another buffer of trees to create a canopy so there's a comfortable place to walk. And then we'll add human scale elements like signs and lampposts. And you know what happens when you put human scale elements into the equation? Humans come back. There's this great book. I had nothing to do with this. I wish I wrote it, but it came out in October called The Sprawl Repair Manual. And Galena, I met her and I saw this book, and I just want to show you some of her proposals. This is an existing suburban house before, and her proposal for after. A typical strip mall before, and then after. A typical gas station before, and after. And then my favorite one, a typical like Olive Garden-y type restaurant before, and after. Let's make neighborhoods again. Let's make communities again. Let's make places where you get out of your car and you don't want to drive your car. You want to walk around. You want to stay there. Let's make real places. We don't need to stop at 6 different errands along the way home. We just can make neighborhoods again. Most cities have this terrible habit of waiting for the developer. And when they do, they bend over backwards for them. Please, Mr. Developer, build any toxic piece of junk you want, and we'll give you tax breaks and incentives. We'll give you the land for free, and we'll do all these great things for you to build this ugly box that we don't want anyway. What cities should do is they should say, if you want to build in our neighborhood, if you want to build in our community, we need joyful, beautiful, healthful, green buildings. We need neighborhoods again, and then you're allowed to build here. Otherwise, we don't want you. Even better, the cities, Even better, the cities could get into development on their own. They could build their own buildings and sell them back to developers and actually make a profit at the same time. They could have roving development boundaries. They have these in Portland, they have them in Boulder. We could do that here. And you could concentrate and focus development where it needs to be, not where developers want it to be. Every city, especially Santa Monica, but even all of LA County could do this. Every city could take the first 4 credits on the LEED Green Building Rating System and have an intern pre-fill them out already. Site selection, development density, brownfield redevelopment, public transit, they don't change, so you already know what they are. Pre-fill them out, put them on the GIS system for everybody to see, and every time a developer comes to town, you can say, here's 4 free LEED credits. Now you have no choice but to build a green building. I got another plan called the Bring Sexy Back plan. Simply put, we get people to fall back in love with their bikes again. I see this beautiful marketing campaign where we get retailers on board to encourage incentives to get people to, ride their bikes. I see beautiful ad campaigns with postcards with attractive people riding their bikes around. We can show people how sexy and hot, the bikes could be. And this one I just like for some reason, so I included it to show you. I'm not quite sure why. Okay, I got another plan called the Billboard Plan. This was the thing that we did in San Francisco. PG&E did this in San Francisco just for 3 months. And I thought it was such a good idea, we should do this everywhere. There's 1 million billboards blighting our freeways. Those 1 million billboards could provide enough power for 3 million homes. Maybe we can't afford not to do this. I got another plan called the Mugu Plan. What's so funny? Simply put, that we stop using cows for food and instead use them for energy. All of you have probably been here. This is Harris Ranch. It's halfway between here and San Francisco, right? It's right off the freeway. When you pass it, you roll up your windows and close the vents. You remember, right? It stinks. It's a stinky, disgusting place where cows wallow in their own filth, just waiting to die. So I call this place Cowschwitz. Some of you won't get this joke. What you're smelling is methane. It's biogas. It's potential energy, and there's biogas potential throughout the entire United States. Not to mention the fact it's better for the cows. Imagine how much happier the cows would be knowing that all you care about are their burps and their farts. And lastly, I got another plan called the McConaughey Plan, which I named after the actor, Matthew McConaughey, who makes the worst movies, doesn't he? They're just terrible movies. I can't believe they keep giving this guy movies. I don't quite get it. And I looked at how much they spend on these movies, and they all lose money. They keep losing money, so I don't know why they keep doing it. And I totaled it up. Over $500 million they spent on his craptastic movies. Do you realize for $500 million I could put solar panels in every rooftop in LA County? Imagine that, clean, abundant energy for everybody in LA County, and we never have to see this putz ever again. Wouldn't that be good? Okay. I was talking to my dad, who's retired. He lives in Florida, and he's grumpy, because most Floridians are. And he said, I have to go. I have to get off the phone. And I said, why? And he said, I have errands to run. I got to go to the hardware store. I got to go to the dry cleaner. I got to go to the grocery store. Maybe I got to stop at the post office. I might go to the mall later, and I'll probably stop at Starbucks on the way home. And then I thought, did we really design the entire landscape so that way my grumpy father can just go to these 6 places over and over again? Is that really what we've done? So I decided to look at that last place, Starbucks. Do you realize that you could show this logo to a 3-year-old and they'll tell you what it is? They already know what it is. They're already brainwashed. And you all know the history of Starbucks, right? It started in 1971 with one store in Pike's Place Market in Seattle, and since then has grown quite a bit. In the 80s, Howard Schultz came in and he had such an experience that he decided he had to work for the company, and 2 years later he ended up buying the company. It turns out that Starbucks occupies this magical place between home and work, this place we call this third place. This place that you can go and you can put your feet up and surf the internet. It's this place that you can go and pick up a muffin top and maybe meet an interesting person. Whichever one's which, really. And the demographics are ideal. They're a marketer's dream, right? Mostly young, mostly female, mostly white, and mostly college educated. It's what every marketer's targeting. And as such, Starbucks is seemingly around every corner, really, if you think about it. And the growth has been staggering. I mean, 17,000 stores and counting. And now they're in 50 countries, even countries that are normally not coffee drinkers, like England. They're tea drinkers there, but they still like Starbucks. And even in spite of the recession, it's dipped down a little bit, but the growth has, kind of gone straight up. So I kind of made this map, and this is all the Starbucks locations in the U.S. And then I thought, well, this is too hard to read, so I made this map. This is Starbucks per capita. And you'll be honored to know that you, as Californians, have the most Starbucks per capita. Congratulations. So then I compared this to another map, Walmart's per capita. And it's the opposite, it's the total opposite. So for some reason, people that like savings don't like fresh roasted blends. I'm not quite sure. So I go back to the first map, Starbucks per capita, and I compared this to all the LEED green building rating buildings. And they line up perfectly. So there is a connection between, I guess, fresh Sumatra roast and sustainability. Who knew? You have to realize that Starbucks is its own country. They even have their own language, and the dorky locals love to speak it. And it's like they're pushing the last legal drug after all, and all of this makes people happy. So what's wrong with that? Starbucks has single-handedly reinvigorated coffee culture here in the U.S. And apparently it's a great company to work for. 11-time winner of Best Company and Most Ethical, Most Admired, Top CSR, all this great stuff. Sounds like a great place. It is a fact that they spend more in healthcare than they do on coffee beans. That is indeed true. They are also the single largest buyers of organic and fair trade coffee, which is great. And they don't even advertise that much, and when they do, it's cool stuff like this, saying, hey, if you vote today, we'll give you a free cup of coffee. Last week for Earth Day, anybody brought in a reusable mug got a free cup of coffee. So it makes you love them, right? They seem like an ideal company, like the perfect place to work for. But I have to tell you, if this is the best that an American corporation can do, as much as I love what they do, as much as I admire what they do and think they should do more of it, and think that every company should copy them, it's not enough. It's not nearly enough. There is a stain, coffee stain, on their reputation. And it really starts with the cups. 2.3 billion cups a year that Starbucks alone produces. And the cups aren't all that great. 10% recycled paper, the rest is plastic, non-biodegradable, very unhealthy. So this has become a familiar sight at cities all over the country, really. Right? You've all seen this before. Even at Christmas time, apparently, you see this, right? You see this everywhere. Globally, we throw away 58 billion of these cups every year. And what we fill the cups with is not that great. Some of it more fattening than a Big Mac. And the embodied energy to make that coffee is not great. The beans come from 13 countries. The sugar comes from 2 countries. The cup comes from 4. Not to mention the fact that it puts mom and pop stores out of business, which has created this backlash, this wave of people that don't want Starbucks in their neighborhood, that actually say they don't like it. And all of this makes me sad. Do you appreciate how hard it was to get this photo? So I have some ideas, some suggestions for Starbucks. Since the cup is such a problem, I thought, can't we make a better cup? So I called Solo, the cup manufacturer, largest cup manufacturer in the world, and I said, what would it take to make a truly green cup? 100% recycled paper, soy-based inks, biodegradable lids. And they said, oh, no, we could do that now. We have all that now. It would just cost twice as much. And Starbucks would have to pass it on to their customers. but they're not realizing something. They would single-handedly make an entire new waste stream. They would create an entire market to recycle, and in doing so, bring the cost down for them. They even held a competition last year to design a better cup, but they didn't design a better cup. They designed an incentive system to get people to bring their own darn cup, which is maybe what they should do, because Starbucks could afford to give every regular customer 4 times a week or more of their own free cup, and it would pay for itself in less than 3 months. In 1962, Alfred Heineken, the beer guy, went on vacation, and one of his beer bottles washed ashore, and he thought, well, this is not a good legacy for me, and he set out to design a better bottle, and he designed this called the Wobo. And the idea was that after you drink the beer, that it would become a brick, and you could fill it with sand, you could fill it with water, or just leave it empty, depending on the climate, and make buildings out of it. Maybe this is what Starbucks should do with their cups. Inside the store, they should make 10% of every store local. On the outside, they could grow their own food, their own herbs, and sell them in the store or give them away to the poor if they want. Since they're so good at managing coffee houses, they could get into the strategic consulting business. They could go to a mom and pop coffee shop and say, you can keep your weird employees with their weird hair and their weird music and their weird clothes, and we'll run it for you. We'll show you how to be profitable. We'll show you how to make a living out of it. And in doing so, they could potentially make billions. Other corporations could learn from this too. Office Depot could have a local store within a store. Home Depot doesn't have to make everything a big box store. They could have smaller stores to reduce the blight and make hardware stores again. And Applebee's, which I've never been to, but hair is delicious, could grow their own food on the outside and serve it inside or give it away to the poor. Why not? On my way to Kauschwitz the other day, I stopped at McDonald's to pee. And to be honest with you, I hadn't been, in comedy we call this a callback, by the way. I don't know if you realize that. So I stopped at McDonald's, and I hadn't been in McDonald's in a while, and I was kind of disgusted at it, because the flickering lights, and it smelled like disinfectant, and everything was bolted to the floor, and it's designed to be like just hosed down. And I realized this is the exact same design brief as a mental institution. That's what they designed here, a mental institution. We need a new design brief, simply put, that we put people first, and the car can come last. And it's simple and elegant, and maybe should be a good thing that we should all keep in mind. After all, they're doing it in places like Abu Dhabi, where they're inventing cities of the future, while we here in this country argue it over who's to blame for global warming. Which brings me to my final point, global warming. These 2 words freak people out. I don't know why, but whenever I say these 2 words, people get up and leave, like that gentleman there. They just get up and split. I said these 2 words in Indianapolis, and people got up and left, and when they left, they put their hands over their ears. Because they didn't want any knowledge coming in. God forbid, they learned something on the way out, so they covered their ears. And it happens all over the country. I get it. I get why you're scared. It's a freaky thing. I'm scared too. Believe me. But I have a brain, and I have eyes and ears, and I can see the data for myself. And I also know that if we found out tomorrow that gay sex caused climate change, that the Republicans would try to abolish it like that, like immediately. They'd do away with it. It has nothing to do with gay sex, actually. Gay sex doesn't play into it at all. Sweet hot gay sex has nothing to do with climate change. So I don't know who told you that, but you should get that out of your heads. It's carbon emissions. No gay sex at all. Copious amounts of carbon emissions, just massive amounts of carbon emissions, more than the Earth can possibly absorb. And it's not like you don't know this, all right? We've been sneaking into your mass media for decades now. You should know this by now. 5.8 billion metric tons of CO2 every year, 16 million metric tons a day, more than the Earth can possibly absorb. Now, in 2006, Al Gore put out a movie called An Inconvenient Truth, which, statistically speaking, all of you have seen, I think, right? Since 2006, Americans' belief in global warming has gone down. The movie's had the opposite effect. Only 75% of Democrats now believe in global warming. Among Republicans, it's only 35%. Among teabaggers, it's like 14%. Now, I hope I didn't offend anybody with that term. I said this somewhere else and they got offended at the term. That's what they call them, by the way. Not my term. So just as I realized only 35% of conservatives now believe in global warming, just as I was about to hit myself in the head with a 2x4, I realized something. We're idiots. Who cares? It doesn't matter what we think. We're morons. Do you realize that 75% of Americans can correctly name the 3 branches of government, but only 40%? Or only 40% can name the 3 branches of government? Only 75% can name the 3 stooges? Clearly we're morons, which might, by the way, explain why government doesn't work so well, by the way. So I started to think about what we as Americans believe to make myself feel better. Only 35% of conservatives believe in global warming, but only 39% of everybody believes in evolution, the scientifically proven fact of evolution. So suddenly I don't feel so bad. I did this joke in Kansas and got nothing, by the dead silence. 10% of you think that Deepwater Horizon was sabotaged by environmentalists. 20% of you think that the sun revolves around the earth, which means that 1 in 5 of you in this room don't get this joke. 11% of you think the moon landing was a hoax for profit. I'm not quite sure why. 21% of you believe in witches, 33% of you believe in ghosts, and 41% of you believe in ESP. 35% of conservatives believe in global warming, but 41% of everybody believes in ESP? We're friggin' idiots. 20% of you believe in reincarnation, which will come in handy, by the way, because apparently 41% of you believe in death panels. That thing that Sarah Palin tweeted on her Facebook page, 41% of Americans believe. 80% of you believe in aliens. But oddly enough, only 32% of you believe in UFOs, which makes no sense to me. 6% of you think that Elvis is still alive, which he'd be 75, by the way, and he'd probably break a hip, let's face it. And the other 94% can't believe it's not butter. Who cares what you think? Who cares what I think? Doesn't matter what we think. Clearly, we can't be trusted. We're morons. Do you realize there's a new American pastime? We have baseball, apple pie, hot dogs, and blissful ignorance. That's our new American pastime nowadays. We just love to wallow in our own ignorance. After all, why do I need to know who these people are? I never want to see these people again. And I certainly never want to go to the Jersey Shore ever. Now, this is physics. Physics doesn't care what you believe. It's physics. You know what you could say? You could say, you know what? The scientists are still arguing about gravity, so I'm still waiting it out. Go ahead. It's physics. It doesn't care if you believe it or not. And the physics is all depressing. It's all bad. I got nothing but bad news for you. I don't even get invited to dinner parties anymore because I'm Debbie Downer now, right? The sheer physics of it is that every summer the sea ice retreats and every winter it grows back, and every winter it grows back thinner and thinner and thinner. And we measure this, with data and science. And we can see it. And we go back decades now and we've measured this. And it's all depressing. So either the climate deniers are all right, and all the scientists in the world are somehow conspiring together and they're wrong, but you still agree we should probably do something about our energy policy. Or the climate deniers are wrong. All the scientists, maybe they're actually right, maybe they know what they're talking about, and you still think that we should do something about our energy policy. Either way, we have to act now, because we've had 40 years of feet dragging, and we can't wait anymore. I realized something. This term, global warming, it's not a good term, because it sounds too pleasant. Right? Anytime I go anywhere cold, I was in Duluth, Minnesota. Where was I? I was in Salt Lake City last week, and it was freezing there, and some moron said, hey, when's the global warming going to get here? And I kicked him right in the shins. So from this day forward, we're not going to call it global warming. Global warming is too nice sounding. From this day forward, instead of global warming, we're all going to call it chlamydia. And all of you got a bad case of it. You better go see a doctor and get that cleaned up, actually, because that's a pretty bad case you've got. I want you to imagine a time that an offshore oil rig exploded in the Gulf of Mexico. It was run by Transocean, and it was caused by a failure of the blowout preventer. 30,000 gallons a day leaked into the Gulf of Mexico. And they tried all these crazy things to stop it. They tried this thing called a containment dome. They tried this thing called a junk shot. They even tried this thing called a top kill, whatever that is. None of it worked. So then they had spread chemical dispersants, even though the EPA told them not to. And it made matters worse. They deployed miles and miles of boom to help soak up the oil that hit the shore, but that didn't work, so they took to burning the oil on the surface, which caused more air pollution. In spite of all of these efforts, oil still washed ashore and devastated miles and miles of coastline. But I'm not talking about Deepwater Horizon. This is the Ixtoc oil spill of 1974. We're still using the same safety manuals, the same procedures, the same cleanup methods. Nothing's changed. Even the stupid haircuts are 1974 back in fashion, and we still haven't learned a thing. The philosopher Edmund Burke said that those who don't know history are destined to repeat it. Let's learn from our mistakes, let's learn from our history, and not repeat it over and over and over again. Let's set an energy policy that we can actually make some changes with. If you want to help out, you can. You can go to restorethegulf.com and sign the petition and demand they clean it up. If you want to use your money, then you can text Gulf Aid 10 or Gulf Aid 5 or even Gulf Aid 1. Every little bit helps to that number, and it'll get to people that need it. Otherwise, you just saw 400 slides. If you can believe it or not, you can download them from there. I'd love to get a business card from all of you, and I will email you back. Otherwise, thank you for coming. Thanks for not leaving, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.